My fiancé met a woman and has been texting her in ways that makes me uncomfortable. I feel a weight in my chest as I type this, a sensation that's equal parts shame and sorrow. This isn't where I imagined I'd be, pouring my heart out into the void. But here I am, a 28-year-old woman, bearing my soul about the man I've spent the last 8 years of my life loving, fighting for, and clinging to like a lifeline. My fiancé is 31. I thought we had it all figured out, or at least that we could figure it out together. But the truth is, addiction has shaped so much of our relationship. It's not the kind of thing you plan for or expect when you are young and in love. You don't dream of nights spent alone while he battles his demons, or mornings filled with dread as you wonder what version of him you will face that day. He's an alcoholic, and that fact has colored every moment of our life together. Recently, after what felt like years of endless cycles, drinking, apologies, promises, and relapses, he finally agreed to go to a facility for detox and treatment. I didn't push him this time. I had learned that pushing only made him retreat further. Instead, I tried to be supportive, to let him come to the decision on his own, even though it tore me apart inside to watch him spiral. When he finally packed his things and left for the facility, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. A fragile, tentative hope, but hope nonetheless. When he called me after being there for a few weeks, I clung to his every word like a lifeline. He sounded different. Lighter, somehow. Like the fog had started to clear. He told me about the people he had met there. It was a unisex wing, he explained, and he had made friends, both men and women, who were going through the same struggles. For a moment, I felt a flicker of relief. Maybe this was good for him. Maybe connecting with people who understood his pain could help him heal in a way I never could. But there was something about the way he spoke that left me uneasy. He mentioned a woman of 40-something named Angela, he said. She's like a mother figure, he told me, his voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. He spoke of her with a kind of reverence, like she was some sort of guiding light in the darkness. I tried to brush it off, to tell myself it was harmless. After all, wasn't this what recovery was about? Building connections, finding support, learning to lean on others. When he came home a week later, I tried to focus on the positives. He was here, he was sober, and he seemed determined to make things work. But something was different. He was on his phone more often than I was used to, snapping selfies in places he'd never cared about before, like the kitchen or the backyard. At first, I told myself I was being paranoid. He was probably just rediscovering himself, finding joy in the little things again. But as the days went on, I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Then came the day he told me he was meeting up with Angela. Just to talk about recovery plans, he said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. I forced a smile and nodded, telling him it was great that he was staying connected with people who supported his sobriety. Inside, though, my stomach churned. I wanted to trust him, to believe that this was all part of his healing journey. So I let him go, watching as he left the house with an energy I hadn't seen in years. He was gone for about 2 hours. When he came back, he was cheerful, almost giddy, talking about their conversation as if it were the highlight of his week. I tried to match his enthusiasm, but the gnawing doubt inside me grew stronger. I reminded myself that recovery was a process, and maybe this was a part of it: rediscovering friendships, learning to navigate life without alcohol. But still, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to the story. Little did I know, this was just the beginning. A week passed, and the days felt heavy with a mix of anticipation and unease. It was only a few days before Christmas, and while the holiday season had always been a time for joy and togetherness, this year felt different, tainted somehow. The air in our home was thick with a tension I couldn't quite name. He had been sober since coming home from the facility, and I wanted to believe that we were heading toward better days. But the cracks were starting to show. Little things, subtle shifts in his behavior, left me questioning everything. That morning, He told me he'd been invited to a family Christmas party. My heart lifted slightly at the thought. His family had always been warm and welcoming, and I missed them. I thought of the laughter, the shared stories, the comfort of being surrounded by people who loved him as much as I did. But as the day unfolded, that fragile hope shattered. He started drinking again. The relapse hit like a punch to the gut, even though I'd been through it before. There's a certain kind of pain that comes with watching someone you love lose themselves to their demons, a helplessness that eats away at you, leaving you feeling small and powerless. I didn't say anything as I watched him spiral, not wanting to ignite a fight. I just swallowed the ache and pretended not to notice. As he stumbled around the house, I decided to do something for myself, a small act of rebellion against the chaos. I wanted to go to the Christmas party, to see his family, to feel some semblance of normalcy amidst the turmoil. But he hadn't given me the address. I didn't want to ask him outright, not in his current state, so I grabbed his phone. I told myself it was innocent. I just needed the address, that was all. Nothing more. But the moment I unlocked his phone, the truth came crashing down on me like a tidal wave. The text app was already open, and there it was, a conversation with Angela. Her name stared back at me, bold and impossible to ignore. My curiosity flared, and before I could stop myself, I scrolled through the messages. The words on the screen burned into my mind. Do you dream of me? I freaking miss you. You don't know how much I care for you. I'm happy for the first time in a long time, and you've been helping with that. Each message felt like a dagger to my heart, sharp and unforgiving. I read them over and over, hoping I'd misunderstood, praying that there was some innocent explanation. But there wasn't. The intimacy of his words, the way he spoke to her, it was undeniable. Angela wasn't just a friend. She wasn't just some comforting presence in his recovery journey. She was something more, something he hadn't shared with me. My hands trembled as I continued to scroll, my mind racing with questions. Who was this woman? What did she mean to him? How long had this been going on? I couldn't stop myself from digging deeper. It was like staring at a car crash I didn't want to see, but I couldn't look away. I found her Instagram profile next, and my heart sank even further. Her name was there, clear as day. She wasn't 40-something like he'd claimed. She was 35, closer to his age than I'd realized. There were pictures of her with her kids, smiling and carefree, living a life that seemed worlds away from mine. I googled her name, desperate for answers, but all I found were more questions. Who was this woman who had so easily captured his attention, his affection, his care? How could he have allowed this to happen to us after everything we'd been through? I closed the phone and set it down, my heart pounding in my chest. The walls of our home, once a sanctuary, now felt suffocating. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. My mind replayed the messages over and over, each word a cruel reminder of the betrayal I'd uncovered. That night, I sat in silence, watching him as he lay passed out on the couch. The man I had loved for 8 years, the man I had fought for and sacrificed so much for, was slipping away from me. And I didn't know how to stop it. Little did I know, the pain I felt in that moment was only the beginning. The same day he relapsed, everything spiraled further out of control. He had drunk so much that his body couldn't handle it, and I had no choice but to take him to the hospital. It was a scene I had experienced before, but it never got easier. The frantic rush, the panic, the guilt that twisted inside me as I watched him deteriorate right in front of my eyes. At the hospital, the sterile white walls felt like they were closing in on me. I stayed by his side for hours, holding his hand, brushing the hair from his damp forehead, and trying to find comfort in the steady beeping of the machines that monitored his condition. I didn't mention the texts I had read, didn't say a word about Angela or the betrayal that was eating away at me. There were so many things I wanted to scream, so many questions I wanted to demand answers to, but I stayed silent. He was fragile in that moment, vulnerable in a way that made my anger and hurt feel selfish. How could I confront him about Angela when he was lying there, fighting the poison he had poured into his body? But that didn't stop the thoughts from flooding my mind. Each time I looked at him, I saw the messages. "Do you dream of me?" His voice echoed in my head, even though it was just words on a screen. I imagined him whispering those same phrases to Angela, his fingers brushing hers as he spoke. The image made me feel sick, and I had to step out of the room more than once just to catch my breath. As the hours dragged on, the exhaustion hit me like a freight train. I couldn't keep my eyes open any longer, and I needed to get home for the night. Before I left, he asked me to take his things, his wallet and clothes, but to leave his phone behind. The request made my stomach churn. Why did he want his phone to stay? Was it to hide something from me? To keep Angela close, even while he was here in this vulnerable state? I nodded, playing the dutiful fiancé as I gathered his belongings and kissed his forehead before walking out of the hospital. The cool night air hit my face as I stepped outside, but it did little to calm the storm raging inside me. When I got home, the house felt emptier than usual, almost hollow. I set his clothes and wallet down on the kitchen table, intending to leave them there and go straight to bed. But as I stared at his wallet, a flicker of curiosity or maybe desperation overtook me. I wasn't planning to snoop. I told myself I just wanted to hold on to something that reminded me of the good times, of the love we once shared. The picture of us, tucked safely in his wallet, had always been one of my favorites. It was from a trip we'd taken years ago, back when we were happy, before addiction had sunk its claws into our lives. I wanted to see it, to feel some connection to the man I thought I knew. But when I opened his wallet, the picture wasn't all I found. There, in the cash pocket, nestled alongside our photo, were 2 condoms in a pair of neatly folded pieces of paper. My heart stopped, and for a moment, I couldn't breathe. My fingers trembled as I pulled out the papers, unfolding them slowly, as if bracing myself for what I already knew I would find. They weren't just notes. They were love letters, poems, really written in a handwriting I didn't recognize but had seen before on Angela's Instagram posts. The words blurred before my eyes as I read them, each line cutting deeper than the last. They spoke of longing, of connection, of feelings that had clearly developed between them during their time in the facility. She wrote about how he made her feel alive again, how he was the light in her darkness, how she wished she could take his pain away. I felt the tears streaming down my face before I even realized I was crying. My mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. The condoms, the letters, the texts, it all painted a picture I didn't want to see. Had he slept with her? Was that why the condoms were there? Was it just an emotional affair, or had it gone further? The questions swirled in my head, each one more painful than the last. I clutched the photo of us, the edges digging into my palms as I stared at the love letters. This picture, this symbol of our love, of the life we'd built together, was now tainted, surrounded by the evidence of his betrayal. I wanted to scream, to throw the wallet across the room, to burn the letters and pretend they didn't exist. But instead, I sat there in silence, my heart breaking all over again. How had we gotten here? How had the man I loved, the man I had sacrificed so much for, allowed this to happen? And what was I supposed to do now? I sat there, numb and hollow, the weight of everything I'd discovered pressing down on me like a heavy, suffocating blanket. The anger, hurt, and betrayal swirled together in a storm I couldn't control. My mind was a battlefield, memories and doubts crashing into each other as I tried to make sense of it all. I felt like shit, there was no other way to put it. This wasn't the life I had envisioned when I said yes to being his fiancé. I had given him everything. Years of my life had been devoted to his battles, his pain, his recovery. And what had I gotten in return? I had lost weight, not because I wanted to, but because the stress had eaten away at me from the inside out. I had cried more tears than I thought was humanly possible, each one a testament to the love and frustration I felt for him. Depression had become a familiar companion, dragging me into its depths over and over again as I tried to keep us afloat. I had sacrificed so much money, friends, opportunities, things that I could never get back. Jobs had slipped through my fingers because I was too distracted, too emotionally drained to focus. Vehicles had been sold or lost to cover his mistakes. And somewhere along the way, I had lost myself. My personality, my spark, the woman I used to be, it had all been swallowed by the black hole of his addiction. And now this. I wanted so badly to give him the benefit of the doubt. To believe that this was all some terrible misunderstanding. But deep down, I knew better. The texts, the letters, the condoms, they were pieces of a puzzle that painted a picture I didn't want to see. And when I thought back to the way he had been talking recently, the way he seemed so different, it all started to make sense. There had been hints, hadn't there? The way he spoke about Angela, the way his eyes lit up when he mentioned her name. The sudden burst of energy, the way he started taking selfies around the house like a man who had rediscovered something or someone that made him feel alive again. I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to cling to the version of him I had fallen in love with, the man who used to make me laugh, who promised me the world before addiction took him away. But how could I ignore what was right in front of me? I stopped snooping because I didn't think I could handle finding anything more. 3 minutes of looking through his texts had been enough to shatter me. Seeing the love letters and condoms in his wallet was like twisting the knife. I wished I hadn't looked. I wished I could go back to a time when I didn't know, when I could still pretend that everything was okay. But ignorance wasn't bliss. It was a lie. I spent the rest of the night sitting on the couch, staring at the wallet, the letters, the picture of us. I replayed every moment of our relationship in my mind, trying to pinpoint where it all went wrong. Was it the first time he drank too much? The first time he lied to me about where he'd been? Or was it later, when I stopped fighting for myself and started fighting only for him? The sun began to rise, casting a pale light across the room. I hadn't slept, and my head throbbed from the effort of holding back tears. I knew I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who didn't value me, who didn't fight as hard for us as I did. When he came home from the hospital later that day, I didn't say anything. Not yet. I needed time to figure out what I wanted, what I deserved. He stumbled into the house, bleary-eyed and pale, mumbling apologies and promises that I had heard too many times before. I nodded, plastering on a fake smile, and helped him to the couch. But inside, something had shifted. For the first time in years, I started to think about what I needed. About who I was before him, and who I wanted to be after him. I thought about the friends I had lost, the opportunities I had missed, the woman I used to see when I looked in the mirror. She wasn't gone, not completely. She was still there, buried beneath years of pain and sacrifice. And I was determined to find her again. That night, I packed a bag. Just a small one, enough for a few days. I didn't know where I was going yet, maybe to a friend's house, maybe to a hotel, but I knew I needed to leave. I needed space to think, to breathe, to figure out if this relationship was even worth saving. As I stood in the doorway, I looked back at him one last time. He was asleep on the couch, his face peaceful in a way that felt almost cruel. I thought about waking him, about telling him everything I had found, but I stopped myself. This wasn't about him anymore. It was about me. I closed the door behind me and stepped into the cool night air, feeling the first flicker of freedom I had felt in years. The road ahead was uncertain, and I knew it wouldn't be easy. But for the first time in a long time, I felt a spark of hope, not for him, but for myself. And that was enough.